thank you all for being here. I want to thank, before anyone, Bianca for this amazing opportunity to be here, present my talk to the files in Blackpool College. Hopefully, this will ignite some discussions, and I really look forward to hearing from you after this. Anyway, my presentation is probably going to be around 45 odd minutes, and we'll just take it from there. All right. So I'm going to be talking about something that I've been working for the last, actually, well, the genesis was at least 4 years back, but especially for the last few months, I've been working on this. Something that I called human, or rather shark human holistic research and knowledge system approach, SHHRKS. This is a methodological proposal. If anything, this hopes to start debate on this topic. Before we get any further into the presentation, I just want everyone to think of two terms. I do understand it sounds a little artsy, but trust me, we'll get to why these terms are important here. Just keep them in your mind as we're going along. All right. So this is what we're talking about. The lives and oceanscapes of sharks are highly threatened, as we all know. The present way of creation and dissemination of knowledge is not having an effective impact on shark conservation initiatives. Here, I plant the seeds of shark human holistic research and knowledge system approach, SHHRKS, a transdisciplinary, transmodal, transknowledge system, multi-species approach in education, creation, analysis, and dissemination of shark knowledge and its application in policy. I explore the need of such an approach, the methodological consideration, and how can such an approach be beneficial. Furthermore, I propose examples of how a course of such a project can be created. So who am I? I am Professor Raj Aich. I have PhD in marine anthropology and applied psychology. My work is a holistic study of cultural and natural scape shaped by physical and symbolic interaction of humans with the marine environment and life forms. It has been a privilege to conduct the first ever white shark cage diving ethnography, at least the full-scale one, which was based in New Zealand. My book on the topic is coming out actually in the next few weeks, so that should be fun. It has also been, really interesting to be the first academic investigator of Sunderburn shark attacks. Something that has been reported a bit by media, but never in academia. So my work, from what I know, is the first one doing that. For which I've been working with Sunderburn Tiger Widow Welfare Association, a grassroots welfare organization in the region. And if there's any question you want to ask about, because these people, these hardworking men and women, work with widows and women who have suffered animal attacks in the regions, be it sharks, crocodiles, or tigers. I am also currently now trying to create a citizen science initiative with Western Australian great white sharks. So yeah, lots of interesting work to be done. Uh, and yeah, miles to go. Before I get into the details, I understand the massive scope of this project. This is only a concept now. Lots of details has to be ironed out, and yeah, I need all the support I can get. Oh, and since we are in Blackpool, I think it's pertinent to introduce my closest friend on planet Earth, and also my research assistant, Susan Lucas. Susan is in New Zealand right now, but Susan grew up in Blackpool, and as a matter of fact, from what I've been told, she did a typewriting course in the Files College. So yeah, I mean, she has been the backbone of all my projects, particularly the New Zealand White Shark project. Without her, the project would not have existed in any way or form. So, all right, an urgent need to rethink shark research. Now we all know that sharks and rays of the open ocean estuaries, they are in decline globally, right? At least 67 species are endangered, or highly endangered. Global abundance has decreased about 71% since 1970. And yeah, and we know the reasons for them. Indeed, these large marine predators, which include some of the the largest maturing and slowest reproducing of all animals, are under greater threat than even amphibians and mammals. So yeah, so this calls for an urgent need to rethink the research and the conservation efforts. Now, let's think about the challenges of contemporary shark research and shark conservation. I think the most important question first is that why do shark research? What's the point, right? I would imagine the first obvious one is, well, because because it's there, right? Or in other words, human inquisitiveness. Human beings wants to make sense of everything. They're inquisitive about the world, about their environment, and sharks are certainly something um, so elusive and so attractive at the same time. Then there could be, we just consider them as resources and we want to take better care of our resources. Well, but that's not always the case, but that could be one of the reasons. It could also be about human shark conflict mitigation. And finally, conservation or shark conservation. So, yeah, so if particularly if the last reason is primarily the case, then we actually have to think, what is the data suggesting? I mean, is the way we are looking at shark research doing enough for their conservation? Can sharks be studied in isolation from the human communities they are part of? See, there is first a lack of disciplinary integration. I mean, social sciences, which recently have started looking at sharks anyway, but has focused on the human part of the human shark interaction, and biological sciences have focused on the sharks. So, I mean, natural sciences, let alone social sciences, has always found hard, studying sharks. I mean, the logistics of it is a nightmare. Any shark scientist would tell you. Sharks are elusive, often large, fast moving, fast ranging fish. It's a vast marine environment. And if you're studying a whale, well, you can wait for the whale to pop up even after a few hours. But if the shark goes down and they decide to stay down, yeah, there's nothing you can do about it. Yeah, that's why there are significant methodological and logistical challenges of studying them. In 20th century, we started having more and more interest in shark research, especially in the 21st century too, primarily for shark fisheries, military interests, and interestingly enough, the same reason that has led to their current negative image might have actually caused interest in studying them in the first place. Yours. Social sciences, on the other hand, didn't really focus on sharks for a long, long time. Even when they did, they've seen sharks and humans in different epistemological paradigms. In classical social sciences, sharks have been kept out of the realm of ethnographic investigation of or even fieldwork for that matter. And only human beings were given the agency of when we are looking at any interaction that's happening between humans and non-human animals. Sharks, like other animals, has been considered to be bystanders and do not, I mean, nothing more than spiritual totem or aesthetic totems. There's also a lack of knowledge system integration. Now, this is very interesting. A lot of biologists or ecologists can, I would imagine, attest to that, that classically natural scientists with marine animal or animals in general have not considered local knowledge to be significant source of resource. Obviously, it's changing, but classically that has not happened. Is particularly with shark research, often fishes or local experts have not been considered to be um, reliable resources. So that has got, I mean, often relating to the fact that they don't have degrees. So this has been problematic. Like, think about it this way. Uh, I found this also in New Zealand when, the cage diving operators who have been in the waters for, when I was doing my field work at a decade at that point, and they've been with them for literally thousands of days. But many of the natural scientists did not want to believe the data that they were creating, and because they didn't have degrees. And 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 the shark cage diving operators actually challenged that by saying, well, but these people, have all these degrees, but they don't spend time with the sharks. So only a handful of researchers, I mean, probably the most prolific one that I know is happens to be one of my mentors, Stephen Crawford, who's an associate professor at the University of Guelph. And Crawford has actually looked at native expert knowledge, scientific knowledge in New Zealand about white sharks. And if you can go to his website, White Pointer Chronicle, and you can see how these different strands of knowledge is so important to create a holistic idea of sharks, let alone any other species. There's also a lack of multimodal data integration. Now, this I find very interesting. Often there is knowledge that cannot be shared by verbal communication. Let's say, I mean, let's think of it this way: the human brain, whenever we're communicating, there are two forms of communication, right? One is intercommunication, then there's intercommunication, the communication that's happening within the brain, then the communication that's happening, among people. So there's a lot of knowledge that has been communicated primarily sometimes within the brain through non-verbal communication. I suppose that's why we find classical classical songs, classical music, abstract painting so interesting, because there's a lot of data that we can't express otherwise are being expressed in this form of communication. Similarly, when you look at a painting, you know that you feel something, but you don't know what it is. But you know that that is something essential about the human condition. Often, these kind of communication, and I would argue data, are not paid attention to when creating, shark knowledge. Um, Multimodality is important because otherwise there's a lot that is lost in translation. You know what? I'm reminded of a story many, many years ago. I had the fortune of having a breakfast with a very famous painter in India, and he was, one of my father's friend. My father's also happens to be a painter. So yeah, and as we were speaking here, he was telling me that the problem that happens in abstract painting is when, I mean, I suppose the example he gave me was, he said, see, when me and your father we speak in English, we think in either Bengali or in Marathi, and then we translate it into English. So what happens? A lot is lost in communication. Then he said that's what happens when people are verbalizing an abstract a painting and then painting it in abstract form. I think the same thing happens when you have a visual thought, but you have to express it in verbal communication. a lot of data is lost in that translation. I mean, there is obviously the epistemological difference between this kind of art and positivistic knowledge, because positivistic knowledge talks about objectivity, whereas abstract art talks about the subjectivity. But I would argue still those data are as significant as the objective data we might have. So yeah, I think a multimodal approach is very important to share, to create and share shark knowledge. Also, there's lack of integration between the knowledge that is created, disseminated, and its effect on policy. Let's face it, all the things that we do means nothing if it doesn't have effect on policy. It's as easy as that. But what happens is a lot of the time the knowledge creators are not the knowledge communicators themselves. So again, a lot of knowledge is lost in translation. And this knowledge then, if we are not careful, that if it has effect on policy, I I don't see the reason. Because again, if our intention of creating knowledge is to actually have effect on conservation, what's the point of creating this knowledge which is just shared among experts and not doesn't go to the people who bring the change? I think that's why it's so important to have a holistic approach towards creation, dissemination, and its effects on policy. Now, all this brings us into the image of the sharks, particularly the white shark, which is, as we know, the poster boy of all sharks, fortunately or unfortunately. The current image of white sharks is what I call a hyperreal image. A hyperreal image means the image of the great white shark, the monster, the beast, is larger than white shark, the fish. Now, this is problematic because social scientists note that this image has significant effect in their conservation efforts, because even now if we think they're a beast, they are beasts in the water waiting to pounce on us. Why would we want to initiate any change in conserving them? So no matter all the knowledge we create, if there is not strategized effort to demystify them, and not a few scientists here or there, or knowledge communicators here or there trying to do that, I don't think that's enough. I don't think that's going to do enough to bring actual actual change in policy and its effects on their conservation. So generally there are two ways promoted of altering shark negative image. One is spreading objective positivistic knowledge. I mean, knowledge like, yeah, you have more chance of being hit by a coconut than being killed by a shark, more chance of being hit by a car, and all those things. So yeah, obviously that's important. The other one is direct exposure with them in the marine environment. Now, as for the direct exposure, for being years in the field and talking with thousands of people about this, the first thing I want to note, at least in cage diving, most of the people who come to do this already have a more favorable opinion about the water, about the marine environment, about the sharks than general population anyway. Yeah, having said that, even they have that hyperreal image in their brain, and when they actually encounter the sharks in the water, there is cognitive dissonance between the fish and the image. But still, the reality is they have higher positive more positive image about the sharks and the marine environment anyway. So yeah, the argument that white shark cage diving can really do a lot of change, I'm not buying it, unfortunately. Also, I think it's also it's so interesting if you really think about it, that even if the claim is that we are trying to desensationalize the sharks, these operations themselves and other operations, use the image of the, of the monstrous shark to attract people anyway. So, and a lot of the images that are taken on TVs and movies to promote these images are also taken from these kind of operations anyway. So, yeah, I'm not really convinced by that. The second is objective knowledge and demystification. Now, the question is, if for argument's sake, Jaws did actually create this hyper real image, the question is, did mere disinformation create this image or misinformation? So, did the information, only the information that was created from Jaws, create this image? That's the question. If not, how do we expect mere information changing that? Hold on to that thought. We're going to come back to that. So, yeah, from there, I propose an epistemological shift in human shark research. First, we need to rethink this entire thing, according to me at least. There's an urgent need to rethink how various disciplines work together in creation and dissemination of various modalities and systems of knowledge and its impact on policy. Sharks should be considered a sentient actor and should be studied with the human communities they are part of. Their interconnected lives, their coexistence, sometimes even conflict. One of the prime methodological approach, I think, that can help us with this is a multi-species post-human perspective. Like I said, um, we need to immediately understand sharks as part of a holistic human encounter and part of the human dimension. So we need to create immediate knowledge about them, not only from an ecological dimension, but also from the relations with human communities, they're closely related, and how both the species have significant agency in shaping each other's lives. So um, there needs to be shift in contemporary ethnographic investigation of human shark relationship. Now, and thankfully, in social sciences, in particularly in anthropology, recently there has been emerging dialogue of the continuum of agency of various non-human animals into human lives. Ethnographic, and it's we call it multi-species ethnography, which is research and writing about the more than human perspective, challenging the classical tradition of human exceptionalism. And yeah, instead of presenting them separate, we see them as part of a holistic network of interactions. Now, having said that, still, there has been a lot of work with dogs. There's been work with elephants, tigers, agrarian animal from a multi-species perspective. Sharks have not really been investigated till very recently, which I have to admit, mine was probably the first extensive one to do that. Um, So yeah, in my last research, the book of which is coming out in the next few weeks, uh, I use the multi-species approach, where I spent all those months out in the field, and I was interested in the lives of the sharks as much as the lives of the people, who were taking part in that. The people from the local community of Bluff, which was the very last island, the very last point at the end of New Zealand's South Island. And the cage-diving operation used to happen from there. So I was interested in Bluff, the community. I was interested in the operators as much as the sharks and the effect of that operation on both the species. But yeah, you know what, I the more I've been getting into this, I don't think that's the most suitable way. Now hear me out. After I finished that, I came back to India. Then I had the um, fortune to work with the shark attacks of Sundarbans. And recently I'm trying to get one of the papers published. It's probably the first full-scale academic publication on that topic. One of the interesting things that one of the reviewers asked me was that, well, you call this a multi-species ethnography, but you didn't spend time in the water with the sharks, and you didn't do an ethnographic investigation with the sharks. And I'm like, all right. So first and foremost, in Sunderburn waters, the waters are so murky you can't see a a bloody penny 2 inches, below the surface, let alone a camouflage shark. How do you do ethnographic investigation with them that you can't even see them when you can't even see them? And that is not just for the Sundarban sharks. That is for many species of sharks, as shark biologists will tell you, that often their absence is as much important of significance as their presence. So I've been thinking, yeah, maybe not always a full-scale multi-species ethnographic approach is the right way to go. And obviously, like I said, the complexities of shark research, you could be there. I remember when I was in the field for 2 months, I was out on the boat, there were no sharks. They just were not there. But it didn't mean, the impact of them culturally, even their absence was not there. But physically, at least, they were not there. Yeah, they're elusive, the environment they are in, and also, when we use a term like ethnography, like multispecies ethnography, I think it automatically refers to social sciences, in particular, anthropology. So people think it's a social science, endeavor where you're bringing in, parts of natural sciences, which I think is a problem. Hence, there needs to be an epistemological alteration in human shark education, shark research, knowledge dissemination informed by multi-species post-human approach, not necessarily multi-species ethnography with sharks. So taking a pragmatic philosophical worldview, there is a need to promote scopes of marine anthropological social scientists working with ecologists, ethologists, biologists, artists, policy experts in investigating related lives of humans and sharks through the creation of transdisciplinary human shark research labs and university curriculum training students in ecological sciences as much as social sciences for human shark research, policy, and art, and training in the proper use of various tools necessary for marine expeditions. All right. So, basing on that, here's what I propose: Shark Human Holistic Research and Knowledge System. Sharks. In which I call for an epistemological alteration in human shark education, research, and knowledge dissemination. I operationally define sharks as a transdisciplinary, transmodal, trans-knowledge system, multi-species approach in education, creation, analysis, and dissemination of shark knowledge and its application in policy. Now we know that in transdisciplinary research, not only the disciplinary boundaries are broken, but it synergizes into one holistic approach. That's what I hope with Shark. Shark will aim at transcending the discipline, modalities, and all system boundaries to create a holistic look at creating and sharing and implementing shark knowledge. So obviously the all these stages of operation has to be understood at least at the basic level by such a scientist who choose to take up such a discipline, from data collection, data analysis, knowledge creation, knowledge dissemination, and to policy. Now, it is important here to define data, because the last few days I've been talking with my colleagues, and we the term data has been raised, and often many of my colleagues have considered data to be quantitative data, but data whatever. But I define it as unbiased or clauses thereof, qualitative, quantitative, sensory information collected with the intent of creating knowledge through the process of analysis. Now, the objectives: to create and share holistic knowledge about sharks and the connections with the human societies, to demystify sharks and create a favorable image. Well, which are two different things, by the way. To initiate policy change for shark conservation, the cornerstones of the approaches are knowledge creation, analysis, dissemination in the same continuum, multi-species approach, transdisciplinary approach, trans-knowledge system approach, and transmodal approach. Now, you know, again, I'm open to a lot more discussion, but as of now, the disciplinary paradigms that I'm considering working together are obviously natural sciences, social sciences, art, in media and cultural studies, and policy. Natural sciences, obviously, all that knowledge of ecology, biology, how are the sharks interacting with their environment? What's the effect in Anthropocene on their lives? All these can be answered through natural sciences. It's so vital. Social sciences, yeah, social sciences will have to bring sharks into the purview of ethnographic investigation and other forms of investigation. I mean, not only is it important theoretically, but it will have a real life effect, because maybe that will help take them out of the realm of the monsters and into sentient beings that they are. And trust me, anyone who has spent a few hours with the white sharks knows that they're sentient. So I think taking them out of the realm of the unknown, of the other, is so important, and such an important part social scientific investigation can take part in. Art. Now, art is very interesting. Like I was saying, my father has been a painter all his life, and I grew up as a painter. It has been said that I literally grew up with paint on my feet. For a long, long time, I revolted against painting and art, because I don't know. But the older I get, I realize how significant a part it can play, particularly in marine conservation and, yeah, shark conservation. So, yeah, art and media studies and culture studies can play a crucial part in challenging the negative image. So, art helps not only to create but to share knowledge that is often not accessible through mere verbal communication, like we discussed, which will be significant to communicate shark knowledge to the general population through linear and non-linear communications. And it's a scope to share personal connection and imbibing cultural, local, native knowledge expressed through art, through sensory expressions, through fables. But also, sharks is not only interested in art from the community. It's also interested in the art that has been created by the researcher in the field. I mean, when I was doing my first field work, I have done hundreds of drawings of sharks. I wasn't really thinking why I'm doing it, but maybe sometimes at the end of the day, or when I had a day off, charcoal and pencil, and because there was so much energy in me. I mean, first and foremost, let's face it, being a boy from Calcutta and being 1,200 kilometers from Antarctica, the environment and being with white sharks, an 18-foot white shark in front of you, gives you different energy in your blood, and that had to be expressed some way. And for me at that point, it was artistic expression. But I would argue there's a lot of important data. That's why I define the term data, that is there about the environment, about the human shark interaction, that these researchers have in them, which is important to consider and cannot be considered in written communication, or should not even be considered in written communication, and should be created and shared through the medium they are perceived in. Yeah, because often there is data that even the researcher isn't aware of. Now, media and cultural studies have such an important part to play. So they can help us to understand the lay of the media in context of changing shark image, and investigate different media representations of sharks in biology, fictional, non-fictional, in art, films, we do not only need to demystify them, but like I said, also create favorable image of them. We need to focus on the contemporary images as much as uh, conservation, and others conservation strategies. Now, we need to really understand the dialectical process of shark or white shark pearl image that has happened in the last, I don't know, 50, 60 years, right? There was a pre-Jaws image of the sharks. Yeah, they were considered to be villains of the sea, but Jaws created that hyper real image, that image which is larger than the fish themselves. Yeah, so the Jaws era, which I would consider the last 35, 40 years, which is probably changing in the last just 5 years, maybe 7 years, I don't know, and which is what I'm calling the post-Jaw era. If you go to any of, Facebook group about sharks, you are going to see people who are fanatically in love with them. But but the problem I see sometimes with that, obviously not all of them, is that they are potentially in love with that monstrous image and that sexy, huge predatory shark, which they have seen in media, and are in love with that image than the fish themselves. So that's I mean, either way, they want to protect the animals, so it's good. But it's important for medias, and cultural studies to observe that. Finally, policy. Like I said, none of it matters if it is not put into policy. So all the knowledge that has been created makes no sense. Um, One thing I want to add here is in India, um, whenever there is, there's a show on TV, movies, whenever someone is smoking, there's like a disclaimer, right? That smoking is injurious for your health. In America, before the last election, when there were tweets by a certain person being put out which were demonstratively false, certain media outlet, put like disclaimer, this is not entirely true, because they understood the real life effect of those messages, on the people. Now my question is, so if we put up this image, right, of this animal, and if it actually does have a significant effect on people's perception and affecting policy, why isn't there disclaimers on these, falsehoods? Why? I mean, why shouldn't there, be accountability for media? If nothing, if not, uh, you know, if nothing, why isn't there a disclaimer? That this is not a reality. A lot of shark shows, as we all know, even now, use the trope of the monster shark. Why isn't there any accountability? Policy holders, policy makers need to work on it as much as saving the species by stopping finning and all those things. None of it matters if people are not ready to support your effort. But again, if the image is causing hindrance in people supporting the effort, we need to think about policy as much as other conservation efforts in demystification. And demystification should be actually strategic approaches instead of random scientists here or there doing their work. So now here's the question about demystification. Like I asked before, and I wanted you to think about it. Did mere misinformation or disinformation create this image? First and foremost, there are multiple factors because of, particularly, let's say right now we're talking about white sharks, multiple factors that created that image. You know, the world was ready for a monster which was real, but too close to reality, but still had the mythical energy. But there were certain behavioral, aesthetics, and environmental trait that tapped into our instinctual fears. The shark was merely the right vessel to commodify our fear and dread of the unknown, the marine environment. But you know what? The the more I've been thinking about it, how to really demystify them. Dostoevsky's words come back to me. Beauty will save the world. For a long time, I didn't understand what that meant, but I'm kind of getting the um, idea that beauty is the essence of life. If and only if we find something beautiful, do we intend to save it. If we love or find something beautiful, we want to take care of it. And now the question is love related only to data and information? So if we give someone information about sharks, is that enough to initiate love? Or is it our love is related to our emotional connection with them beyond often, objective reasoning? There is also, I think research in marketing sciences which is showing that yeah, often in decision making process, people depend on their emotion more than their cognition. Hence, I would like to propose the key is love and beauty. We have to understand the reason of this fear, and then create a dialogue of healing our scared minds, bringing the shark scientists, the locals, the non-experts, the everyone together and share our experiences. Almost like think of it like a social cognitive behavior therapy, starting from small groups, not just anyone just standing, and giving a lecture, but, talking about it. And, then maybe to the mass society. Yeah, that's where a multimodal artistic perspective can really help, I believe. Sharing stories of our love, admirations. Yeah, like I said, there's knowledge and emotion that cannot be communicated through other forms, and art and sensory expression. That's why it become so important here. As much as obviously public education initiatives, and spread of objective knowledge. Yeah, so strategic goals and steps. Yeah, the long-term goal would be, be part of a or have a lab, in a university or um, part of an organization. Initially, we have to start by creating our team, build up the basic hypothesis. Like I said, we're still, I'm still working on it. Publish and apply for grants, creating a lab, and yeah, and create a curriculum and teach. So here's something fun. I'll give you a hypothetical, course structure. Let's say we start off with bachelor's, right? So for sharks, bachelor's would be 4 years, and year one we introduce the students to shark biology, shark ecology. Year two, shark social sciences, introduction to marine policy and implications on sharks. Year three, media studies, cultural studies on shark image, and introduction to relation of art with sharks and marine environment. Year four, transdisciplinary methods, methodology and tools, and finally conservation sciences. The masters will be 2 years taught. The first year will be taught, and a student can choose the specialization they want to go in, and then a dissertation and a PhD. Obviously their choice of topic, but always with the perspective of transdisciplinarity and thinking of how this can be created, uh, analyzed, and put into policy. That has to be the underlining understanding. But obviously they will expertise in their particular field. So yeah, to conclude, the global shark population is dwindling. The mere creation of isolated strands of natural and social knowledge about them, about sharks, is not enough to create sustainable conservation efforts. compulsion to focus on new forms of research platforms to create and share knowledge about them and their connection to human societies. We need to emphasize on objective scientific data as much as sharing personal emotional connection and imbibing cultural, local, and native knowledge through art, sensory expressions, and fables. We shall be part of a new transdisciplinary team who are aiming to bring a new methodological and epistemological paradigm shift in and create holistic research by bringing in the social sciences, natural sciences, law, policy, and art, and to create a holistic approach in contemplation, dissemination of transmodal, trans-knowledge system, human shark knowledge. We know there's a lot of challenges ahead. It's a huge endeavor. I completely understand that. Yeah, we need to figure out more details about the methodology, funding, the right team, which is probably the most important part. So, if anything, from this lecture, I invite, interested scientists to get in touch with me and let's work together and build this together. You may be an ecologist, a biologist, someone who works in policy, in media sciences, art, whatever it is. I welcome you. And yeah, the right university organization to support this. So come back to the 2 points that I started from. At the end, I do believe that beauty will save the world. Thank you.